Well, let's talk about this upcoming meeting now. We have joining us via Skype to discuss this from Pretoria, South Africa, a senior researcher at the South African Institute of Security Studies, Dr. Akinola Olojo. Thank you for joining us at this time. All right, what would be your own version of the major talking point? I mean, how would you want this lingering security challenge on the Nigeria-Chad board addressed?
First of all, I think it's very heartbreaking to learn of the news emerging from the northeast of Nigeria. But you see, what has happened has occurred within a context of a trail of events over the last 6 months. So we need to understand that all this is happening, of course, bearing in mind that there are two factions, linked to Boko Haram now. There is the one which is led by Abubakar Shekau, and of course the breakaway faction reportedly led by Abu Musa Barnawi, which has a particular focus on targeting the military. So we see all these assaults since July this year. We've also witnessed executions of medical aid workers, Saifura Kosa and Hawa Liman, in September and October respectively. These events are happening also at a time when there are serious reports about troops, complaining about inadequate and obsolete weapons at their disposal to even launch offensives or even defend themselves. So one of the talking points, of course, expectedly will be to definitely talk about, discuss the border, the border issues between Nigeria and Niger. There are reports regarding how the Nigerian government has withdrawn troops from its border areas because of its own particular internal challenges, with security. So, of course, that takes away from the kind of reinforcement or collaborative efforts with Nigerian security forces, to be able to protect civilians and even troops from the assaults of Boko Haram. Now, we look at all these things, and one needs to ask the question of, okay, is a military solution the only option here? Because we must bear in mind that in the last 2 years, within a space of 2 years, there have been about 5 replacements, reshuffling of military leadership of Operation Lafia Dole. And of course, we still see the same results.
All right.
This is not, yeah.
All right, Doctor. Your analysis, of course, now brings us to another question, which you literally took out from us here about whether military solutions, because now the generals would be meeting again this week. And of course, Nigeria isn't isolated in all this militant attacks now, from Boko Haram and its allied forces. Cameroon has had its own dose of kidnapping incidents this year, and indeed all the other West African countries that, have something in common militarily, so to speak. So would the solution mainly lie at the quarters of the military? I mean, what do these countries need to note?
Okay, that's a very important issue to raise. Clearly, we know that it's not only a military solution that is required. The struggle against the Boko Haram and its breakaway faction is one which goes beyond the use of force. It entails much more than guns and bombs to end it. And, proclaiming that it's one which can be ended either technically or otherwise, a technical defeat of the group. I think we're really, really in for the long haul here. And we first have to, think beyond the military mindset. We need to look at the ideological dimension of this whole thing. Boko Haram is not the first kind of, group to emerge. We need to look at this in the long term. We've had the Maitatsini crisis in the 1980s. And who knows, in the future, there might be another one to erupt. So the ideological dimension of the crisis also needs to be addressed. Now, we need to identify particular local community actors with credible voices. For instance, engaging Islamic clerics at some point to be able to tackle that aspect, because they are the most familiar in terms of the essential ideological elements of the doctrines of these groups, to be able to tackle it, that is needed to tackle it. Beyond ideology, of course, we also need to ensure that the multinational joint task force and other relevant security entities work more closely with the civilian actors on the ground. Since 2013, of course, the Civilian Joint Task Force has worked with the Multinational Joint Task Force. But at the same time, the kind of intelligence that is obtained through them, through their knowledge of the terrain, must be put into proper use.
All right.
Already, okay.
Sorry again for the interruption, but then let me also find or get your views now on this latest, assault on the Nigerian military. Of course, you wouldn't, be unmindful of the deaths of soldiers, at the hands of Boko Haram fighters. Now there is a call loud here in Nigeria about, let's probe past military budgets. Publish the names of the soldiers killed. I mean, why would the army here, not, talk about that, acknowledge these guys who have, given their lives to preserve Nigerians? What are your thoughts here?
Of course, we all know that when we talk about terrorism or terror attacks, one of the primary components or aspects of this is propaganda. Now, it's quite understandable to some extent when you think of the fact that the army or the security forces or agencies may not want to begin to draw up a list or publish a comprehensive list of those who have died, even though, of course, Nigerians may be calling for this. But publishing such a list or making very public the individuals, the identities of those who have been affected, in a way can be seen as feeding into the propagandist strategy of Boko Haram. And when that happens, of course, the group uses it to be able to gain some kind of, its victory, those, those victorious or glorious kind of achievements, which the group obviously is, trying to push forward. But at the same time, Nigerians are eager to know, what has happened. On the side of the government, the Nigerian government, there is a need to be a bit more, perhaps more transparent and a bit more, revealing in terms of the details of what has happened. Because when the media talks about this, it raises more questions. People need to know exactly what is happening. We know that the commander of the battalion that was affected at Metele a couple of days ago, his picture is already online. But at the same time, we have images being circulated on various websites by various entities of some falsehood.
Right. All right, Dr. Akinola Olojo, we appreciate your analysis. Of course, he's the senior researcher at the South African Institute of Security Studies. Thanks, Doctor.